The desert sunset painted the mesas gold as Nahkohe returned to his isolated camp, the white man's silver spent on what they called damaged goods. The girl sat rigid in the saddle behind him, her eyes burning with defiance despite the rope binding her wrists. 5 failed marriages and a reputation for being untamable had marked her value down to nearly nothing. Nahkohe, himself an outcast from his tribe for refusing to surrender his ancestral ways, had expected submission from his purchase, a helper for his struggling mustang camp. Instead, he found Wildfire in human form. By the 3rd night, she had slipped her bonds and stolen his best horse, but rather than fleeing, she was breaking another mustang at dawn's light. Could this fierce spirit be the answer to the ancient prophecy his grandfather whispered of? The one who rides as equal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nahkohe fingered the weathered bow that had belonged to his grandfather, one of the few possessions connecting him to his heritage. The old wood felt smooth beneath his calloused fingers, polished by generations of warriors before him. In the flickering light of the evening fire, he watched the white woman from a distance, her silhouette sharp against the desert twilight as she sat alone at the edge of camp. 3 days had passed since he'd brought her here, and still she barely spoke. Not that he'd expected gratitude. The transaction at the trading post had been clear. 5 silver pieces for a woman no white man would keep. A bargain, they'd said, even for damaged goods. He had not told them his true purpose, that his small band needed every hand they could find to survive. "She will try to escape again," said Tarak, his oldest friend and the only one of their childhood hunting group who had chosen to follow Nahkohe into exile. "And yet she returns," Nahkohe replied, his dark eyes never leaving the distant figure. 3 times now. The first escape had been expected. He'd even left the ropes loose enough, curious what she would do. By morning, she was gone, along with his best horse. By midday, she had returned, the horse exhausted but unharmed, and she simply went to work with the other mustangs, as if nothing had happened. The second time, she'd taken food and a knife. Returned with 3 rabbits, skinned and ready for the pot. The 3rd time had been last night. She'd taken nothing, simply walked into the desert under the moon. He'd followed at a distance, watching as she stood on a mesa edge, arms outstretched. To the stars, her hair wild in the night wind. She'd spoken words he couldn't hear, a prayer perhaps, before returning to camp on her own. "The elders would say she brings bad spirits," Tarak said, poking at the fire. "The elders say many things," Nahkohe answered, the bitterness still fresh, though it had been 5 summers since his banishment. "They said accommodation with the white eyes was the only path. They said our ways must change. And you said no." Tarak nodded, the story familiar to them all. "I said we could adapt without surrender." Nahkohe placed his grandfather's bow carefully beside him. "My father bent until he broke. I will not." The small band that had followed him, 17 at first, now 23 with children born in exile, lived in this hidden canyon because they refused to accept the reservation offered by the army. They survived by capturing and training wild mustangs, then trading them at frontier outposts where no questions were asked about Apache gold or Apache horses. It was a hard life, but a free one. And now this woman, too wild, the settlers said, untamable. He almost smiled at the irony. "What will you do with her?" Tarak asked, his voice low enough that the others around the fire couldn't hear. "Do? Nothing." Nahkohe stood, stretching his tall frame. "She is free to leave. You paid good silver. For what? A spirit like that cannot be owned." He nodded toward where she sat alone. "Watch her with the horses. She speaks to them as our grandfathers did. Before the rifles came." Tarak looked unconvinced. "She is white. Is she?" Nahkohe lifted his chin toward the woman. In the fading light, her profile could have been Apache, proud, sharp, unyielding. Her skin, perhaps, her spirit. He let the words trail off. He walked away from the fire toward where she sat. She heard his approach. Her back stiffened, but she didn't turn. As he settled on the ground, a respectful distance from her, he noticed the small carving in her hands. A horse, its lines flowing and graceful, emerging from the pale wood. "You have skill," he said in the broken English he'd learned from traders. Her eyes, when they finally met his, were the color of the sky after rain. Not a white woman's pale blue, but something deeper. "My father taught me," she said, her voice rough from disuse. The first personal words she'd spoken. Nahkohe nodded and said nothing more. Sometimes silence was the only proper gift to offer a wounded spirit. As the stars emerged above them, they sat side by side, each carving their separate stories into the desert night. A week passed before Nahkohe learned her name. Sarah, she said it was, though she spoke it like a word that belonged to someone else. He found her one morning at sunrise, washing her few possessions in the stream that fed their hidden valley. Among them, he noticed a torn scrap of white fabric, delicate despite the dirt and wear, unmistakably part of a wedding dress. "5 husbands?" he asked, keeping his distance as he had learned to do. She startled like a deer at his voice, quickly bundling the fabric away. "5 mistakes," she replied, her tone hard as desert stone. Then, softer, "Not all mine." She stood, wringing water from a worn shirt. The morning light caught the scars. On her wrists where ropes had cut too deeply, Nahkohe felt a flash of shame for the bindings he had used those first days. "My father raised me alone," she said suddenly, as if the words had been building pressure behind a dam. "He was a scout for the army, then a trapper, taught me everything, how to track, to hunt, to break horses." Her hands worked mechanically as she spoke. "When fever took him, my mother's sister claimed me, said no girl should live wild like I did." Nahkohe nodded, understanding flowing between them. The struggle against those who would reshape you to their liking was a language they both spoke, fluently. "First husband was a storekeeper," she continued, eyes fixed on the distant mesas. "Kept me locked inside. I lasted 3 months before I walked out with nothing but my father's knife." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Second was a farmer who needed strong sons, beat me when I wouldn't bear fruit." Her hands stilled on the wet cloth, knuckles white. "Third was a preacher who thought he could pray the wildness out of me. Fourth was drunk most days. Fifth," she shrugged. "Fifth was just desperate for any wife, even one with my reputation." "And now?" Nahkohe asked quietly. Her eyes, when they met his, held neither fear nor submission. "Now I'm here, and you're not like them. How do you know this?" She nodded toward the mustang herd grazing nearby. "You don't break your horses, you gentle them, and—" Her gaze was steady. "You haven't tried to break me." That evening, as the band gathered for the evening meal, Sarah sat closer to the fire than she had before. The children, always quicker than adults to accept difference, had already begun bringing her interesting stones and asking her to tell them about the world beyond their canyon. Now, as Nahkohe watched, old Enola, the band's eldest woman, offered Sarah a bowl directly instead of setting it aside for her to take later. "The woman has skills," Enola told Nahkohe when he thanked her for the kindness. "Saw her mending little bird's doll with stitches fine as mine, and she knows plants. Found her gathering the yellow root we use for fever. She had a good teacher," Nahkohe said. "Most do," Enola replied, with the cryptic smile of the very old. "Question is whether they were wise enough to learn." Later, when most had retired to their shelters, Nahkohe found Sarah still by the fire, her fingers working a piece of rawhide into something new. "My people call me Nahkohe," he said, realizing he had never properly introduced himself. "It means walker of the desert path." She tested the name on her tongue, pronouncing it better than most whites managed. Then she said, "My father called me running fox." Her eyes met his over the dying fire. "Sarah was my mother's choice, never suited me." Running fox, he repeated, nodding slowly. It fit her. Quick, alert, resilient. She returned to her work, but something had shifted between them. A truth exchanged, freely given rather than taken. In the language of the desert, where water was precious and gifts rare, it felt significant. As he turned to leave, she spoke once more. "I won't run again," she said, her voice carrying quiet certainty. "Not from here." Dawn light found Nahkohe and Running Fox sitting cross-legged at the edge of camp, a stretch of smoothed sand between them. In Nahkohe's hand was a slender teaching stick, carved with symbols along its length, a tool his grandfather had used to instruct him in the old ways. "Sky," he said in Apache, pointing upward with the stick. Then, in his limited English, "Sky. Bike Goya," she repeated carefully, her tongue struggling with the tones. He nodded, then drew the Apache symbol in the sand. "Sun," he continued, pointing. "Shah," she echoed, this time with better pronunciation. They had been at this game for 3 mornings now. What had begun as simple gestures and fragmented words was slowly building into something more, a bridge between worlds. Running Fox learned. Quickly, her memory sharp. Nahkohe found himself impressed by her ear for language, better than any white person he had encountered at the trading posts. "Your words dance," she said in her own language, making a flowing motion with her hand. Then, with careful concentration, attempted the same thought in his tongue. Nahkohe smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "Not bad," he replied, half in Apache, half in English. "But you just said your words are swimming." Her laughter came unexpectedly, bright as spring water in the desert morning. It drew curious glances from others in the camp, unused to such. Sounds from either the solemn warrior or the quiet white woman. "Swimming words," she repeated, still smiling. "Maybe better, words should flow." He couldn't argue with that wisdom. The Apache language moved like water over stone, shaped by the land itself. English always seemed to him like the chopping of an axe, useful but harsh. Running Fox leaned forward suddenly, taking the teaching stick from his hand. With confident strokes, she drew a new symbol in the sand, not Apache, not English, but something that combined elements of both. "Rides like wind," she said, pointing to herself. "My name now." Nahkohe studied the symbol, recognizing the Apache elements for wind and horse blended with something new. It was presumptuous for an outsider to claim an Apache name, yet something about her certainty, the way she had created rather than simply taken, gave him pause. "Rides like wind," he repeated, testing the name. It suited her better than either Sarah or Running Fox. It spoke of who she was becoming here, not who others had tried to make her. "Good?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability beneath the question. He nodded slowly. "Good, but others may not accept." She shrugged, unconcerned. "They will when they see me ride." That afternoon, her prediction proved true. The band had been breaking new mustangs captured from the northern valleys, and Rides Like Wind joined without invitation. When Tarek began to object, Nahkohe raised a hand for patience. "Let us see," he said in Apache, then translated for her benefit. She approached the most spirited of the mustangs, a dun mare that had thrown 2 riders already. Instead of immediately attempting to mount, she simply stood before the animal, speaking in a low voice, a mixture of English and newly learned Apache words that made no logical sense, but somehow conveyed calm. The band watched in silence as she slowly circled the mare, never breaking eye contact, her movements fluid and unthreatening. When she finally placed a hand on the horse's neck, the animal trembled, but stood its ground. By sundown, she was riding. The mare around the perimeter of camp, bareback and with only a thin cord looped around its neck for guidance. "Horse magic," whispered Little Bird, a child of 7 summers, watching wide-eyed. "Just patience," Rides Like Wind replied in halting Apache, understanding more than she could yet speak. That night, as the fires burned low and most had retired, Nahkohe found her adding a new symbol to the growing collection she drew each evening in her private place at camp's edge. "What means this one?" he asked, his English improving with daily practice. "Home," she replied simply, not looking up. "Maybe." The word hung between them, fragile as smoke in the desert air. The braided horsehair rope lay coiled in Rides Like Wind's hands, a creation of her own making. Apache horsehair techniques blended with frontier knotwork. Like her, a thing of two worlds, yet entirely its own. She worked the final strands as the morning sun crested the canyon walls, casting long shadows across the camp. "Too thin," commented Tarak, who had been watching with poorly disguised interest. "It will snap when the Mustang fights." Rides Like Wind didn't look up from her work. After a month in the camp, she understood more Apache than she let on. "Not if the Mustang doesn't need to fight," she replied in her improving but still halting Apache. Nahkohe approached, overhearing the exchange. "My friend doubts your rope," he translated unnecessarily, "and your methods." She tied the final knot and held up her creation. The braided rope gleamed in the sunlight, each strand woven in a pattern that made the whole stronger than its parts. "Then let us see whose way works better," she said, standing and facing Nahkohe directly. A challenge. Nahkohe raised an eyebrow. Challenges were serious business among the Apache, not issued lightly, not refused without shame. That she understood. This cultural significance showed how closely she had been observing their ways. "What terms?" he asked, aware that the camp had grown quiet, all eyes on the exchange. "The black stallion," she said, nodding toward a fierce Mustang they had captured 3 days ago. The animal had already injured 2 men who attempted to break him. "You with your methods, me with mine. The one who can ride him to the far mesa and back wins." "And the prize?" Nahkohe asked, protocol demanding that stakes be set. Rides Like Wind thought for a moment. "If you win, I will speak only Apache for 1 full moon." A murmur went through the watching band. Her Apache was still rudimentary. Such a commitment would force her to learn quickly or endure much frustration. "And if you win?" Nahkohe pressed. Her eyes met his without wavering. "If I win, I join the next trading party to the settlement." Another murmur, stronger this time. Women, especially one who might be recognized, never accompanied the trading parties. Too dangerous. Nahkohe studied her face, reading the determination there. She had not asked to leave permanently. She wanted to prove she could be trusted beyond the canyon walls. "Agreed," he said finally. At midday, by noon, the entire band had gathered at the horse enclosure. The black stallion paced nervously within the rough corral, sensing the unusual attention. Nahkohe entered first, rope and bridle in hand, the traditional Apache approach. What followed was a display of skill and courage that even Tarak had to admire. Nahkohe moved with the experience of someone who had broken dozens of wild horses, his movements precise and confident. The stallion resisted fiercely, rearing and charging, but Nahkohe anticipated each move. After nearly an hour of struggle, he had the bridle in place and mounted the still bucking animal, forcing it into submission through sheer will and strength. When he finally rode the stallion out of the enclosure, the creature was responsive to his commands, though its eyes still rolled with defiance. The band cheered his victory as he dismounted, patting the horse's sweating neck. "Well done," Rides Like Wind acknowledged, stepping forward for her turn. "Now may I try?" Nahkohe removed the bridle and led the exhausted stallion back to the enclosure. "He has no strength left for your way," he said. "Then I will take the red mare," she replied, pointing to an equally fierce Mustang they had captured the same day. "Unless you fear that would be an unfair advantage for me." His eyes narrowed at the challenge, but he nodded. The red mare, Rides Like Wind, entered the enclosure with only her braided rope and a small pouch. The mare immediately retreated to the far corner, snorting warnings. Instead of approaching directly, Rides Like Wind simply sat in the center of the corral, her back to the horse. Confusion rippled through the watching band. Even the children fell silent, not understanding her strategy. From her pouch, she took dried berries and began to eat them slowly, occasionally tossing one behind her toward the mare. She hummed softly, a melody none recognized, yet somehow soothing. She did not look at the horse. She did not approach it. She simply waited. Time stretched. Some of the band began to grow restless, but Nahkohe signaled for patience. He was beginning to understand. After what seemed an eternity, the mare's curiosity overcame its fear. Step by hesitant step, it approached the still singing woman. When it finally stretched its neck to sniff her shoulder, Rides Like Wind slowly raised a hand, offering more berries. By sunset, she was riding the mare beyond the canyon walls. Her braided rope looped loosely around its neck, her body moving in perfect harmony with the animal. The mare responded to the lightest touch, to the subtlest shift of weight, not broken, but partnered. When she returned, the entire band waited in silence. Even Tarak looked thoughtful. "Different ways," Nahkohe said as she dismounted. "Both have power." She nodded, patting the mare's neck affectionately. "Both have purpose. Breaking is faster, sometimes necessary, but gentling lasts longer," he finished for her. Their eyes met in understanding that went beyond words. The stolen cavalry saber caught the firelight, its brass hilt gleaming dully as Little Hawk turned it in his hands. The young warrior had just returned from a scouting mission to the north, bringing both the weapon and troubling news. "They camp here," he said, tracing a location on the rough map scratched into the dirt. 2 days' ride, 15, maybe 20 men. Nahkohe studied the map, his expression grim. "Apache?" "Some," Little Hawk answered. "Others white. A few Mexican. Outcasts all." He handed the saber to Nahkohe. "Their leader carries this. Calls himself Ghost Dog." A murmur passed through the gathered men. Ghost Dog was known to them, a former warrior from a neighboring band who had been cast out for cruelty even the war chiefs could not tolerate. That he now led a mixed band of raiders was disturbing news. "They've attacked 2 settlements already," Little Hawk continued. "The White Eyes blame all Apache. Army patrols have doubled." Nahkohe turned the saber in his hands, thinking. Their hidden canyon had protected them thus far, but if raiders were moving south, discovery became more likely. The band's safety, built so carefully over 5 years, suddenly felt fragile. "We should move deeper into the mountains," Tarak suggested, "until the raiders pass. And abandon the spring grazing for our horses," Nahkohe countered. "Winter comes soon. We need fat horses to trade and to survive." The men fell to discussing options, voices growing heated. None noticed Rides Like Wind's approach until she spoke. "Build. Deadfalls in the narrow passes," she said in her accented Apache, "and false trails leading away from the canyon." Silence fell as all eyes turned to her. Women did not typically join war councils. "This is not your concern," Tarak said stiffly. "Raiders made it my concern," she replied, holding his gaze. "Before your people, before white settlers, my father tracked men like these for the army. I know their ways." Nahkohe saw several warriors bristle at her boldness. Even after 2 months among them, many still viewed her with suspicion. Her growing closeness to Nahkohe himself had not gone unnoticed or unremarked upon in private. "What would you suggest?" he asked, ignoring Tarak's disapproving glance. "They follow game trails and water," she said, kneeling beside the dirt map. "Here and here." Her finger traced 2 approaches to the canyon. "Block the eastern path with deadfalls. Rocks rigged to slide with little effort. For the western path." She looked up at Nahkohe. "We make it too tempting to ignore." "Explain," he said, intrigued despite the impropriety of her participation. "Leave signs of a hasty departure. Tracks heading north toward the high plateau. A few items dropped in panic." Her eyes gleamed with strategic intelligence. "While we remain here, watchful and prepared," Tarak snorted. "And if they see through this trick, then we fight on ground of our choosing, not theirs," she answered simply. The men exchanged glances, some thoughtful, others dismissive. "Women do not plan war," one of the older warriors finally said. Rides like wind rose to her feet. Then call it hunting, she replied, a hint of challenge in her voice, for these men are predators, and all predators can be lured and trapped. Later, as the council continued without her, Nahkohe found Rides like wind at the edge of camp, her back straight with contained anger. They will not listen to wisdom from a woman, she said, before he could speak, even if it means their children's safety. They listen, Nahkohe corrected quietly. They do not yet accept. And you? She turned to face him, moonlight silvering her features. Do you accept wisdom regardless of its source? He considered her question seriously. I try, he answered finally, though it is not always easy to see past what we are taught. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Show me, he said. Show you what? This trap you would set, not in words but in action. He gestured toward the darkness beyond the camp. Tonight, we will lay your false trail, you and I. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed with determination. You trust my plan? I trust your experience, he replied carefully, and I would see it work before asking others to believe. By dawn, they had completed the work. A convincing trail of tracks and abandoned items leading away from their canyon, while the eastern approach now hid 3 carefully balanced deadfalls, ready to be triggered by sentries if needed. As they returned to camp, exhausted but satisfied, Nahkohe noted the new respect in Tarek's eyes when he inspected their night's work. The white woman has clever hands, he admitted reluctantly. Rides like wind, Nahkohe corrected. And yes, she does. The bundle of healing herbs hung from the shelter's center pole, their pungent aroma filling the small space. Rides like wind. Crushed another leaf between her fingers, adding it to the steaming water. Beside her, old Enola nodded approval, her gnarled hands guiding the younger woman's movements. Good, the elder murmured. The fever spirit respects the bitter taste. On the pallet of rabbit furs lay 7-year-old Talasi, his small body burning, with fever that had come suddenly in the night. His mother, Kiona, sat nearby, eyes dark with worry as she watched the 2 women work. My son, she whispered, looking to Enola. Will he? Hush, the old medicine woman replied. The spirits listen for weakness in a mother's heart. Rides like wind glanced up from her work. 3 months among the Apache had taught her much about their healing ways, but also their deep belief that words themselves held power. To speak of. Fear was to invite it closer. He is strong, she said instead, using the Apache phrase that acknowledged both the truth of the present struggle and the hope for its outcome. Kiona's eyes met hers, grateful but still wary. Though most of the band had come to accept Rides like Wind's presence, Kiona remained cautious. Her husband had died in a clash with white settlers 2 winters past. Enola gestured for the herbal infusion. Now we must wake him enough to drink. Together, they raised the boy's head. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. Hurts, he mumbled in Apache. I know, little warrior, Rides like Wind replied softly. This will help the hurt leave your body. As the boy sipped the bitter medicine, Rides like Wind reached into the small pouch at her waist and removed a piece of willow bark. This was not part of the Apache remedy, but something her father had taught her, learned from an old trapper who had lived among the Lakota. She caught Enola's questioning glance and hesitated. The old woman's permission mattered. This was her domain, her healing ritual. For the pain, Rides like Wind explained quietly, and to cool the fire in his blood. Enola studied the bark, then nodded once. Rides like Wind added it to a separate cup of water, letting it steep while they finished administering the traditional medicine. Later, as Talasi finally fell into a quieter sleep, his skin marginally cooler to the touch, the 3 women stepped outside the shelter into the evening air. The white woman's bark, Enola said, her tone neutral. It has power. My father called it the pain tree, Rides like Wind replied. I've seen it break fevers when nothing else would." Kiona looked between them, then back to her son's shelter. "I thank you both," she said formally, then added in a softer voice to Rides Like Wind, "and I thank your father's wisdom." It was a small gesture, but significant. Rides Like Wind inclined her head in acknowledgement. Through the night, they took turns watching over the boy. Near dawn, Rides Like Wind woke from a brief sleep to find Nahkohe sitting outside the shelter, his back straight despite the long hours. "You should rest," she said, settling beside him. "The band's children are my responsibility," he replied simply. She studied his profile in the faint pre-dawn light. "You would have made a good father," he glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features, before he schooled them back to calm. "Perhaps in another life." Why not this one? His silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "A chief with no tribe can offer little security to a family." "You have a tribe," she countered. "Small, but loyal. A band of outcasts living in the shadows of two worlds." There was no self-pity in his voice, only pragmatic assessment. "Sometimes shadows are the best place to grow something new," she offered. Before he could respond, Enola emerged from the shelter, her face relaxed with good news. "The fever breaks," she announced. "The boy will live." Relief passed visibly through. "Nahkohe, your medicine is strong," he told the old woman. "This time the medicine was threefold," Enola replied. "Apache herbs, white woman's bark, and—" Her aged eyes crinkled with a knowing smile. "The strength that comes when enemies become allies." Her gaze shifted meaningfully between Nahkohe and Rides Like Wind before she turned back to the shelter. As the sun rose fully, word spread through the camp of Talas's recovery. People stopped by the family's shelter with small gifts: a rabbit freshly caught, a blanket newly woven, a carved toy to cheer the convalescing boy. To Rides Like Wind's surprise, many acknowledged her with nods or words of thanks. Even Tarek, passing with an armful of firewood, paused to say gruffly, "The boy's mother says your medicine helped." "Enola is the true healer," she replied diplomatically. "Enola says otherwise." He shifted the wood uncomfortably. "She says you have healing in your hands." It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was something new, a crack in the wall of suspicion that had surrounded her arrival. As she helped Kiona prepare broth for her son later that day, Rides Like Wind felt a strange sensation settling in her chest, unfamiliar after years of being an outcast among her own people. It felt, improbably, like belonging. The buffalo hide star chart lay between them, its surface worn smooth by generations of hands. Upon it, ancient figures connected the heavenly lights in patterns meaningful to the Apache people. Nahkohe's finger traced the constellation his people called the Great Hunter. "He follows the desert hare across the night sky," he explained, his voice low in the stillness. They sat on a high ledge overlooking the sleeping camp, the desert night vast above them. "When he catches it, winter ends." Rides Like Wind studied the pattern, then pointed to the same stars. "My father's people call this the Big Dipper," she said. "Part of the Great Bear." Nahkohe raised an eyebrow. "A bear? That is a strange vision." "Says the man who sees a rabbit made of stars," she countered with a smile. Their laughter mingled in the cool night air, a sound that had become less rare between them as summer waned toward autumn. 4 months had passed since her arrival, transforming her from prisoner to something Nahkohe had no proper name for. Not quite friend, certainly not mate, yet somehow essential to the rhythm of the band's life. "These stars here," she continued, pointing to another pattern, "my father called the Road of Souls. He said our ancestors walk it after death." Nahkohe nodded slowly. "We call it the Spirit Path. The great warriors ride it to the afterlife on ghost horses." "Not so different then," she observed. "Perhaps the stars speak the same truth to all who listen," he suggested, "though in different tongues." She considered this, her face thoughtful in the starlight. "The months in the desert sun," had darkened her skin, and with her hair worn in the Apache style, she appeared less and less the white woman they had first seen. Yet it wasn't just her outward appearance that had changed. Something fundamental had shifted within her, a settling, as though she had finally found solid ground after a lifetime of drifting. "My father told me once," she said after a comfortable silence, "that knowing the stars meant you could never truly be lost." Her voice softened with memory. "After he died, I would look up at night and feel him guiding me, even when everyone around me tried to make me into something I wasn't." "And what were you?" Nahkohe asked. She smiled faintly. "Untamed, unbroken, unsuitable." The English words had no direct Apache equivalents, but he understood their meaning. And now? Her eyes met his, steady and clear in the moonlight. Still, untamed, but no longer lost. Something shifted between them then, a current like the desert wind before a storm. Nahkohe felt it in the suddenly charged air, in the way the space between them seemed simultaneously vast and non-existent. Before either could speak again, a soft sound drew their attention. Little Talassi, now recovered from his fever, had climbed. Up to their perch, a small wooden horse clutched in his hand. "Show me the sky horses," the boy demanded without preamble, settling himself unceremoniously between them. The moment, whatever it had been, dissolved, but something of its essence remained, a sweet tension hovering at the edges of awareness. "Here," Nahkohe said, lifting the boy onto his lap and guiding his small hand toward the stars. "See how they run across the darkness." As he named each constellation for the child, Rides Like Wind watched them together, the warrior and the boy, connected by stories older than either. She had seen how the children of the band gravitated to Nahkohe and how he never turned them away despite his responsibilities. In those moments, his stern features softened, revealing the man beneath the chief's necessary armor. Later, after returning the sleepy child to his mother, they walked in comfortable silence back toward the camp. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what? For teaching me your stars, for—" She gestured vaguely at the canyon, the camp, the life they had all built here. "For this place." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You are no longer a captive here," he said, his voice low and serious. "You have not been for many moons." "I know," she held his gaze. "I stay by choice." "Why?" The question was simple, direct, and surprisingly vulnerable. She considered her answer carefully. "Because here, beneath these stars, I am not too wild." A small smile touched her lips. "Or perhaps everyone else is wild enough." Something in Nahkohe's expression shifted, a subtle change only someone who knew him well might notice. "Tomorrow," he said, "I lead a hunting party to the northern valleys. Ride with us." It wasn't a request Apache women typically received. Hunting parties were for warriors, not for women, and certainly not for outsiders. That he asked her now, under the stars they had just shared, felt significant in ways neither could fully articulate. "I will," she answered simply. Above them, the spirit path glowed white against the velvet darkness, a road leading somewhere neither had expected to travel. The wanted poster fluttered against the trading post wall, its edges curled and yellowed. From sun exposure, Rides Like Wind froze when she saw it, her own face crudely sketched beneath the words "runaway wife" and "reward." She had not expected this, not after nearly half a year. "We should leave," she murmured to Nahkohe, who stood beside her examining goods on the trader's rough-hewn shelves. The trading party, Nahkohe, Tarak, Little Hawk and herself, had ridden for 2 days to reach this remote outpost, bringing 4 trained mustangs to trade for winter supplies. Nahkohe followed her gaze to the poster, his expression hardening. "Who claims you still?" "The last one," she said quietly. "James Everett. He paid good money to my aunt." Before Nahkohe could respond, the trader emerged from the back room, followed by 3 dusty riders who had clearly just arrived. Rides Like Wind turned away quickly, pulling her hat lower, but it was too late. "Well, I'll be damned," said one. Of the men, his voice slurring slightly with whiskey. If it ain't Everett's wild woman. She kept her back turned, hand instinctively moving to the knife at her belt. Nahkohe stepped slightly forward, placing himself between her and the men. "You trade with us?" he asked the trader, his English deliberate and accented. 4 horses, good training. The trader, a grizzled man named Macready, who had dealt with Nahkohe's band before, nodded cautiously. "Always happy for quality stock, Chief, but seems there might be a complication." He glanced at the newcomers, then back to Rides Like Wind. "That poster's been up for months." $20 for her return, said the man who had recognized her, stepping closer. She recognized him now, Silas Dawkins, who had once courted her himself before deciding she wasn't worth the trouble. Plus, whatever reward Everett adds personal. "He's been in the States since she run off with his silver and his best pistol. I took nothing but what was mine," Rides Like Wind said, finally turning to face them. 5 months in the desert had changed her. She stood straighter, her skin sun-darkened, her eyes steady and unafraid. "Ain't for us to decide, Sarah," Dawkins replied, using the name she had discarded. "Law says you're Everett's, till death or divorce." "Your law," she countered. "Not mine anymore." Tarek and Little Hawk had moved closer, sensing the tension. Though they had been skeptical about bringing a woman, especially this woman, to the trading post. Tribal loyalty now superseded their misgivings. "The woman rides with us," Nahkohe stated flatly. "She is Apache now." Dawkins laughed, a harsh sound, in the dusty trading post. "Apache? Her?" He looked to his companions. "Hear that, boys? Injun thinks he can steal a white man's property and call it tribal adoption. 4 horses, Nahkohe repeated to Macready, deliberately ignoring Dawkins. "Good price." The trader looked uncomfortable, caught between regular customers. "Look, Chief, I don't want trouble, but that poster's legal. I'd be obliged to report I saw her." "Then report," Rides Like Wind interjected, stepping forward. "Tell them I was here, and tell them this too. I was purchased fair by this man." She nodded toward Nahkohe. "Paid $5 silver at Jensen's Crossing. If Everett has a quarrel, it's with the Apache, not with me." The logic of this, using the settlers' own property laws against them, caused a moment's silence. "That true?" Macready asked Nahkohe. "I pay silver," Nahkohe confirmed, catching on quickly, "at White Man's trading place, for her." He deliberately didn't mention that this had been over 5 months ago, or that she was now free to leave whenever she chose. Dawkins scowled. "Don't matter. Law says a husband's claim comes first. Then Everett should seek compensation from the trader who sold what wasn't his to sell," Rides Like Wind replied evenly. "I'm not property to be passed back and forth like a faulty rifle." Macready, seeing a way out of his dilemma, nodded slowly. "She's got a point, Dawkins. If she was sold to the Apache, legal-like, then Everett's complaint is with Jensen, not with them, and I ain't about to start a tribal incident over someone else's business." "Dealing." Dawkins' hand drifted toward his gun. "Everett's my friend. He's been looking for her since spring. And he'll continue looking elsewhere," Nahkohe said quietly, his hand now resting openly on his knife. Tarek and Little Hawk flanked him, their postures making it clear that violence would be answered with violence. For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then Macready slapped his hand on the counter. "No bloodshed in my store," he declared firmly. "Dawkins, you and your boys, ride on if you're not buying. Chief, let's see these horses of yours. Business is business." Rides Like Wind caught Dawkins' eye as he reluctantly backed down. "Tell Everett I died in the desert," she said. "It would be simpler for everyone." "He won't believe it," Dawkins muttered. "Then tell him I've found warriors who know a woman's." "Their worth isn't measured in silver," she replied, a hint of steel beneath the words. "And they don't take kindly to claims on what is freely given." The ceremonial face paint felt cool against Rides Like Wind's skin as the old medicine woman applied the final marks: white clay for wisdom, red ochre for courage, black charcoal for strength. In the pre-dawn darkness, the symbols seemed to float. On her skin, transforming her into something neither white nor Apache, but something new and unnamed. "They will not make this easy for you," Enola murmured as she worked. "The old ones rarely do." 3 days had passed since 5 elders from the main tribe had arrived unexpectedly at their hidden canyon. They had come ostensibly to discuss the growing raider threat, but their true purpose became clear when they demanded Nahkohe explain the white woman's presence among them. "She has lived with us for half a year," Nahkohe had said simply. "She has earned her place." The eldest of the visitors, a warrior named Stone Bear, who had once fought alongside Nahkohe's father, had scoffed. "A place? What place does a white woman have among the people?" It was Tarek, surprisingly, who had spoken next. "She heals our sick. She trains our horses. She helped defend against raiders." The elders had exchanged troubled glances at this unexpected advocacy from Nahkohe's skeptical friend. "If she would claim a place among the Apache," Stone Bear had finally declared, "then she must prove herself by Apache ways." Now, as the eastern sky lightened with approaching dawn, Rides Like Wind prepared to face the elders' challenge. No one had told her exactly what the trial would entail. Such tests were traditionally kept secret until the moment they began. All she knew was that they were reserved for warriors coming of age or outsiders seeking adoption into the tribe. No woman had faced them in living memory. "I am ready," she told Enola, rising to her feet. The old woman studied her with ancient eyes. "Yes," she said after a moment, "I believe you are." The entire band had gathered in the ceremonial circle at the canyon's heart. The visiting elders sat cross-legged on elevated stones, their faces impassive as Rides Like Wind entered the circle. Nahkohe stood to one side, his expression carefully neutral, though she caught the brief flicker of concern in his eyes. Stone Bear rose, his white hair catching the first rays of sunlight. "You who are called Rides Like Wind," he intoned in Apache, "you seek a place among the people. Are you prepared to be tested?" "I am," she replied in the same language, her accent still present but her understanding now complete. "3 trials you must face," he continued. "Skill, endurance, wisdom. Fail anyone, and you must leave this band forever." She nodded her acceptance of the terms. Some part of her had been expecting this moment since she first chose to stay. The inevitable reckoning with the larger tribe whose ways she had adopted. "First trial, skill," Stone Bear announced. "You will face Shadow Walker in combat." A young warrior stepped forward, perhaps 20 summers old, his body marked with the scars of previous battles. He carried no weapons, but his stance spoke of extensive training. Whispers rippled through the watching band. Hand-to-hand combat was not a typical test for outsiders, especially not against one of the tribe's most promising young fighters. Rides Like Wind removed her knife and handed it to Enola. She had learned some Apache fighting techniques from watching the warriors train, but had never formally practiced with them. This would be a test of instinct as much as skill. "Begin," Stone Bear commanded. "Shadow." Walker circled her slowly, his movements fluid and confident. When he struck, it was with blinding speed, a sweeping kick meant to take her legs from under her. Rides Like Wind jumped, barely avoiding the blow, and countered with a quick jab that missed as he twisted away. The exchange set the pattern for what followed, his superior training against her raw instinct and frontier-honed reflexes. Twice, he nearly pinned her. Twice she escaped with unexpected moves no Apache would have used. The watching crowd grew increasingly engaged, calling out encouragement to both combatants. When the end came, it was not with victory, but with respect. Shadow Walker, pressing his advantage after a particularly effective strike, found himself suddenly airborne as Rides Like Wind used his own momentum against him, a trick she had learned from her father, who had once wrestled with Cheyenne hunters. Both fighters lay in the dust, breathing hard, neither clearly dominant. Stone Bear raised his hand. "Enough," he declared. "Skill is proven. The second trial, endurance, proved even more demanding. Rides like wind was required to run to a distant mesa and back, carrying a heavy stone. Two other young warriors ran with her, both seeking to prove themselves to the elders. One returned before her, one did not return at all, overcome by the heat. She staggered into camp as the sun reached its zenith, her body near collapse, but her spirit unbroken. Endurance is proven, Stone Bear acknowledged. The final trial, wisdom, came as the day waned. Seated before the council fire, she was presented with a tribal riddle so ancient its origins were forgotten. Stone Bear spoke it slowly in Apache. Its rhythms like a chant. What walks without feet, speaks without mouth, lives without breath, and dies without death. The firelight flickered across expectant faces. No hint, no clue was offered. She closed her eyes, letting the riddle turn in her mind like a stone in a river, smoothing its edges until its shape became clear. When she opened her eyes again, they reflected the dancing flames. "A story," she answered in Apache. "A story. Walks across generations, speaks truth to those who listen, lives in the hearts of the people, and dies only when forgotten." Silence fell over the circle. Then Stone Bear's weathered face creased in a reluctant smile. "Wisdom," he pronounced, "is proven." The ancient cave paintings glowed in the slanting afternoon light, ochre and charcoal figures telling stories from a time before memory. Rides like wind stood transfixed before the weathered rock face, her fingers hovering just above the surface, not quite touching the fragile images. "Who made these?" she asked softly. Nahkohe shook his head, equally awed. "Not Apache, older. Perhaps the ancient ones my grandfather spoke of. They had discovered the hidden canyon by accident, while tracking a small herd of mustangs, 3 days' ride from their camp. What had begun as a routine expedition had transformed into something else entirely when their horses had stumbled upon a narrow passage, barely visible between towering rock walls. The canyon beyond was a revelation, a hidden valley with a small, clear spring feeding a stream that nurtured cottonwoods and willows. Protected by sheer cliffs on all sides, it was accessible only through the passage they had found, or by scaling the walls, a natural fortress, invisible from the surrounding desert. But it was the cave, halfway up the eastern wall, that had drawn them in, and now these paintings telling a story neither had expected. "Look," Rides Like Wind said, pointing to a series of figures along the lower edge. Different peoples standing together. The images were unmistakable, figures drawn in varying styles and colors, some with the distinctive headdresses of ancient tribal peoples, others with what appeared to be the wide-brimmed hats of early Spanish explorers. Yet they stood in a circle, hands joined beneath a painted sun. "Harmony," Nahkohe murmured, the Apache word carrying layers of meaning beyond its English equivalent. Or at least, possibility. Rides Like Wind moved along the wall, studying each panel of images. "There's a story here," she said, flowing from scene to scene. Nahkohe followed, his hunter's eye catching patterns she might have missed. "It begins with separation," he noted, indicating figures clearly divided by a jagged line. "Then conflict." The next panel showed what appeared to be a battle. Then he paused at the third panel, where two central figures, one from each group, stood face to face. "Meeting of leaders," Rides Like Wind suggested. "Or something more," Nahkohe replied thoughtfully. The fourth panel confirmed his intuition. The two figures now stood side by side, leading their formerly divided peoples toward a common purpose. The final panel showed the joined circle they had first observed. "It's like the prophecy," Rides Like Wind said suddenly. "The one your grandfather spoke of." After passing her trials, Rides Like Wind had been formally recognized by the visiting elders, not as Apache exactly, but as a friend of the people with the right to remain. During the ceremony that followed, Stone Bear had unexpectedly spoken of an ancient prophecy, one that Nahkohe's grandfather had been known for reciting in his final years. "When the eagle and the wolf hunt together, Old enemies will find new paths, Stone Bear had intoned. The one who rides as equal brings harmony to broken circles. At the time, Nahkohe had seen the old warrior's words as a reluctant blessing of Rides Like Wind's presence. Now, standing before these ancient images, he wondered if there had been deeper meaning in the prophecy. Perhaps, he acknowledged, though prophecies are often understood only after they are fulfilled. They continued exploring the canyon throughout the afternoon, finding evidence of previous habitation, stone tools, pottery shards, the remains of an ancient cooking pit. Whoever had lived here had done so successfully and in apparent peace. As the sun began to set, they made camp near the spring, reluctant to leave their discovery. The small fire cast dancing shadows across the canyon walls as they sat side by side, sharing a meal of dried meat and berries. "This place," Rides Like Wind said after a comfortable silence, "it feels protected." Nahkohe finished for her. "Set apart." "Yes?" She looked around the sheltered valley, her expression thoughtful. "Your band could live here, more securely than your current camp." The same thought had been forming in Nahkohe's mind. Their present location, while hidden, was vulnerable to discovery, as the recent raider threat had reminded them. This canyon offered better protection, more water, and grazing adequate for their needs if managed carefully. It would mean starting again, he said, building new shelters, moving the horse herd, but worth it for the security, she countered. Especially with winter coming, they fell back into companionable silence, each contemplating the possibilities. The night deepened around them, stars appearing one by one above the canyon walls. "What was your dream?" Nahkohe asked suddenly. "Before all this, before the marriages, before the trading post, what future did you see for yourself?" Rides Like Wind considered the question, her face softened by firelight. "Freedom," she said finally. "Not freedom from, I had enough of that, running away. Freedom too, to choose my own path, to live by my own strength." And now, she turned, to face him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Now I have that freedom, here with the band, with—" She hesitated, then added quietly, "with you." The moment hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Nahkohe felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the thin mountain air. "I have watched you," he said, his voice low, "the way you move between worlds without belonging fully to either. You have made your own path." "As have you," she replied, "neither fully the warrior your father wanted, nor the peacemaker the elders demanded." "Perhaps that is our shared fate," he suggested, "to walk between worlds." Her hand found his in the darkness, warm and calloused from work and riding, or to build something new from both. When their lips met, it felt like the inevitable conclusion to a story long in the telling, as natural and necessary as the joining of stream to river, river to sea. The ancient paintings watched over them, silent witnesses to the fulfillment of patterns set in motion long before either was born. Later, as they lay beneath star-scattered skies, plans for the future began to take shape between them, not just for themselves, but for the band, for this place that felt like a gift from ancestors neither had known they shared. The cavalry officer's telescope gleamed dully in Little Hawk's hands as he passed it to Nahkohe. The young scout's expression was grave as they crouched on the ridge overlooking the western approaches to their territory. "Blue coats," Little Hawk reported. "2 days' ride from here, 20, maybe 25 soldiers." Nahkohe raised the brass instrument to his eye, adjusting it as he had learned from traders years before. The distant figures came into focus, mounted soldiers in blue uniforms, a supply wagon, and what appeared to be 2 Apache scouts leading them. "They follow the raiders' trail," he observed, noting their direction, "which leads too close to our canyon," Little Hawk added grimly. It had been 3 weeks since their discovery of the hidden canyon, and preparations for the band's relocation were well underway. Half their number had already moved to the new site, with the remainder, including the horse herd, scheduled to follow within days. The timing of this cavalry patrol could not have been worse. "How did you get this?" Nahkohe asked, indicating the telescope. Little Hawk's face showed a flash of pride. "They camped near the Eastern Springs last night. I waited until the sentry grew sleepy." He shrugged. "The white eyes believe they can see better than Apache, but their night vision is poor." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Nahkohe felt a moment of admiration for the young warrior's skill. "Good scouting. Return to camp and alert Tarek. Begin moving the remaining families to the new canyon immediately." As Little Hawk slipped away, rides like wind emerged from the brush where she had been gathering medicinal plants. She had clearly overheard their conversation. "How much time do we have?" she asked, setting down her basket of herbs. "If they maintain their pace, 2 days before they cross our trail," Nahkohe replied, still scanning the distant cavalry through the telescope. "Less if they push harder." She knelt beside him, her brow furrowed in thought. "If they're pursuing raiders, they may not care about your band. Apache scouts travel with them," he reminded her. "If they find signs of our camp, they will report it." The implications hung unspoken between them. Discovery could mean forced relocation to the reservation, or worse if the soldiers had orders regarding hostile bands. "Then we must make sure they find nothing," she said decisively. Back at the main camp, chaos threatened as word of the approaching cavalry spread. Families hurriedly packed their few possessions, preparing for immediate departure to the new canyon. Warriors argued about whether to fight, flee, or attempt to mislead the patrol. "We should kill the scouts," Tarek insisted in a heated council. "Without Apache eyes, the bluecoats are blind in this country." "And bring the wrath of the entire fort down upon us?" countered an older warrior. "The army would hunt us to the last child." "We can disappear into the mountains," another suggested. "Leave no trail for them to follow." As the debate grew more heated, Rides Like Wind listened silently from her place, at the edge of the circle, present by Nahkohe's insistence, though tradition would have excluded her from a war council. "What if," she said finally during a lull, her voice cutting through the tension, "we don't need to fight or flee?" All eyes turned to her, some curious, others dismissive. "You suggest we surrender?" Tarek asked incredulously. "I suggest we negotiate," she clarified. From a position of strength, not weakness, Nahkohe gestured for her to continue, ignoring the mutters of disapproval from some of the older warriors. "The army is hunting raiders who have attacked settlements," she explained. "Your band has done nothing against the white towns. In fact, you trade peacefully with them." "The blue coats do not distinguish between Apache bands," someone objected. "Then we must help them distinguish," she countered. "If someone approached them, someone who could speak their language, explain your peaceful intentions." Realization dawned on the gathered faces. "You," Tarek said flatly. "You would go to them," she nodded. "I understand their ways, their thinking. I could make them understand yours." "It is too dangerous," Nahkohe said, speaking for the first time since the council began. "If they recognized you from the wanted poster—" "I would go as an Apache woman," she replied, meeting his concerned gaze steadily. "Not as Sarah Everett." The council erupted in fresh debate, some seeing the wisdom in her proposal, others outraged at the thought of trusting their fate to a white woman's diplomacy. Through it all, Nahkohe remained silent, his eyes never leaving Rides Like Wind's face. Later, as the camp dissolved into the controlled chaos of evacuation, he found her packing her few possessions. "You cannot do this," he said without preamble. She continued her work, not looking up. "It is the best chance for your people." "Our people," he corrected quietly. "After all that has happened, are they not yours as well?" Her hands stilled. "That is why I must go. And if they take you, if they return you to—" He couldn't finish the thought. "They won't," she said, with a confidence he wished he could share. "I know these men," not personally, but their kind. They follow orders, they respect boundaries. If I can convince them your band poses no threat, they will gladly focus on their real mission. And if you cannot? She finally looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. Then the band will already be safe in the new canyon, and only I will be lost. The simplicity of her willingness to sacrifice herself struck him like a physical blow. This woman, who had been bought and sold and passed between men who saw her only as property, was now offering herself as a shield for those who had once been her captors. "I forbid it," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. Small, sad smile touched her lips. "You cannot forbid what was never yours to command, Nahkohe." She rose to face him. "That was the gift you gave me, though you may not have meant it. The freedom to choose my own path, even when that path leads away from you." The peace pipe, carved from canyon stone and adorned with eagle feathers, felt heavy in Rides Like Wind's hands as she waited on the sun-baked ridge. Below, the cavalry patrol approached slowly, dust rising from beneath their horses' hooves. She had chosen this meeting place carefully, open enough that the soldiers wouldn't fear ambush, elevated enough that she could be seen from a distance. She had left at dawn, slipping away while Nahkohe was organizing the final evacuation of their original camp. She'd left a message with Enola, knowing the old woman would understand her reasons, even if she couldn't approve her methods. By now, the band would be well on their way to the safety of the hidden canyon. The cavalry spotted her when they were still half a mile away. She saw the patrol halt, officers conferring, field glasses raised in her direction. After a brief consultation, a single rider broke from the group and approached cautiously. As he drew nearer, she could see he was young, perhaps 30, with a neatly trimmed beard and lieutenant's bars on his shoulders. He rode with the easy confidence of someone raised in the saddle. 20 yards away, he reined in his horse. "Hello, the Ridge," he called, his hand resting casually near his holstered. "Pistol, I come to talk," she replied in clear English, standing slowly with the peace pipe visible in her hands, alone and unarmed. The lieutenant studied her with open curiosity. She knew what he saw, a woman dressed in Apache garments, but with unmistakably European features, her skin darkened by the desert sun, but her eyes still revealing her heritage. "You're white," he said finally, surprise evident in his voice. "I am Rides Like Wind," she answered, neither confirming nor denying his observation. "I speak for Nahkohe's band. Lieutenant Thomas Caldwell, 6th Cavalry," he introduced himself, relaxing slightly but maintaining a cautious distance. "What band is this? We're tracking Ghost Dog's raiders." "We are not raiders," she said firmly. "Nahkohe's people trade peacefully with the settlements. They want no part in Ghost Dog's violence." The lieutenant frowned. "You're living with them, voluntarily." "I am one of them," she replied simply. Before he could respond, movement on the trail behind her caught both their attention. Nahkohe appeared on horseback, his face set in grim lines. As he approached, he wore no war paint, carried only a knife, and had deliberately left his bow behind, but his presence changed the dynamic instantly. The lieutenant's hand moved back to his pistol. "You said you were alone." "I believed I was," she replied, throwing a frustrated glance at Nahkohe as he dismounted beside her. "You should not have come alone," he said to her in Apache, his voice low, "and you should have trusted me to handle this," she responded in the same language, noting how the lieutenant tensed at their unintelligible exchange. "English, please," Caldwell requested, his tone professional but wary. Nahkohe turned to face the soldier, switching languages with careful precision. "I am Nahkohe. My band hunts, gathers, trades. We do not raid." "He speaks the truth," Rides Like Wind added. "His people left the reservation because they wanted to live by traditional ways, not because they sought conflict." The lieutenant's gaze moved between them, assessing. "You know we have orders regarding Apache off the reservation. Ghost Dog's raiders have attacked 3 settlements." she countered. They've stolen horses, burned homesteads. Has Nahkohe's band done any of these things? Caldwell hesitated. Not that I'm aware of. Ask your scouts, she pressed. They know the difference between raiding parties and peaceful bands. For a long moment, the lieutenant said nothing, clearly weighing his options. Then he gave a small, decisive nod. I'll need to speak with my captain. We understand, Rides Like Wind replied. We will wait. As Caldwell rode back to the main patrol, Nahkohe turned to her, his expression a mixture of anger and relief. You could have been killed, he said, or worse, taken. I left word with Enola, she replied, her own frustration evident. Why did you follow me? Because He stopped, struggling with words that did not come easily to him. Finally, he said simply, because I could not let you face this alone. The simplicity of his answer dissolved her anger. Before she could respond, Lieutenant Caldwell returned, accompanied by an older officer with a captain's insignia and hard eyes that had seen too many frontier conflicts. Captain Wallace, the lieutenant introduced his superior. This is Rides Like Wind. And Nahkohe, the captain's weathered face betrayed no emotion as he studied them. Lieutenant Caldwell tells me you're with a peaceful band, he said to Nahkohe, yet you're off the reservation against government orders. My people follow the old ways, Nahkohe replied steadily. We harm no one. The reservation was established for your protection, the captain countered. The reservation was established for your convenience, Rides Like Wind interjected, earning a sharp glance from both officers. Before tension could escalate, she held out the peace pipe. Captain, we're not asking for promises you can't keep. Only time. Your patrol seeks raiders who have attacked settlements. Nahkohe's band has never raised a hand against any white town. And how do I know that? Wallace asked bluntly. Because they are horse traders, she explained. They capture wild mustangs, train them, and sell them at frontier outposts. Ask at Jensen's Crossing, at McCready's trading post. They'll confirm what I'm saying. The captain's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. So you're suggesting we focus on Ghost, Dog, and leave your band be? For now, she confirmed, until wiser decisions can be made by both sides. Captain Wallace exchanged a glance with his lieutenant. Your band stays west of the Painted Rocks, he said finally to Nahkohe. My patrol will remain east. That gives us both room to complete our business without complications. It was not a permanent solution, but it was a beginning, a recognition of boundaries, a provisional peace. As the officers prepared to depart, Lieutenant Caldwell hesitated, then asked Rides Like Wind quietly, Were you taken against your will? Initially. She met his concerned gaze directly. I was purchased, she answered truthfully, but I stay by choice. Something in her voice must have convinced him, for he nodded once before turning his horse to rejoin his patrol. The wedding blanket grew beneath the skilled hands of the band's women, its intricate pattern incorporating both Apache and frontier designs. Kiona, who had once been the most reluctant to accept Rides Like Wind, now directed the weaving with surprising enthusiasm, showing younger women how to blend the traditional geometric patterns with the flowing floral motifs Rides Like Wind had sketched. It will be the most unusual blanket ever to cover a union, Enola observed, her ancient fingers still nimble as they worked colorful threads into the fabric. Like the couple themselves. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with the cavalry patrol. The band had completed their move to the hidden canyon, establishing a new settlement that already felt more secure than their previous home. The natural fortress of stone walls, combined with the temporary agreement with Captain Wallace, had brought a sense of stability they had not known for years. In that atmosphere of cautious hope, Nahkohe had formally asked Rides Like Wind to join with him in marriage. His proposal, delivered with characteristic directness as they watched sunrise paint the canyon walls, had been simple. Our paths are already one. Let us make it known to all. Her acceptance had been equally straightforward. "Yes," she had said, taking his hand, "our paths are one." Now preparations were underway for a ceremony that would honor both their traditions, a blending as unique as their relationship. The entire band had thrown themselves into the arrangements with unexpected enthusiasm, perhaps seeing in this union a symbol of their own growing harmony with the changing world around them. "Will you wear the white wedding dress?" Little Bird asked Rides Like Wind as she helped gather wildflowers for the ceremonial space. The child had become her constant shadow in recent months. "No, little one," she replied with a gentle smile. "That belongs to a life I've left behind." "Then what will you wear?" The girl persisted, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Something new," Rides Like Wind answered, her mind turning to the garment she was creating in secret moments, a dress that combined the practical design of Apache women's clothing with elements from her frontier heritage. Not everyone shared the general enthusiasm. Some of the older warriors, particularly those with strong ties to the main tribe, maintained a skeptical distance from the preparations. Tarek, though supportive in his gruff way, had expressed concerns about potential repercussions. "The elders may not recognize such a union," he warned Nahkohe, as they worked together reinforcing the canyon's defensive positions. "It could weaken your standing with the main tribe." "My standing with the main tribe has been weak since I refused the reservation," Nahkohe replied without concern. "This changes nothing. It changes everything," Tarek countered. "A chief with a white wife. A chief with a wife who has proven herself Apache in all but birth," Nahkohe corrected. "Who passed the trials, who faced the cavalry for our sake, who has taught us new ways to survive in changing times." Tarek had no immediate response to this, though his furrowed brow spoke of ongoing reservations. That evening, as the band gathered for the communal meal, Nahkohe announced his intention to send messengers not only to the main tribe to inform them of the upcoming ceremony, but also to selected settlers who had dealt fairly with them over the years. "This union bridges two worlds," he explained. "To the surprised gathering, let both worlds witness it." Murmurs of concern rippled through the band. Inviting outsiders to their hidden sanctuary seemed risky, especially so soon after establishing themselves in the new location. "How can we trust the white settlers not to betray our position?" an older warrior asked, giving voice to the common. "Worry. We invite only those who have proven themselves worthy of trust," Nahkohe replied. "McCready, who has traded fairly with us for years, Jensen, who warned us of army movements last winter, and Dr. Morgan," Rides Like Wind added, "who treated spotted fawn's fever when no other medicine would help." The discussion continued late into the evening, concerns balanced against the symbolic importance of including representatives from both cultures. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Messengers would be sent, but guests would be blindfolded. For the final approach to the canyon, protecting the exact location of their new home. Later, as Rides Like Wind prepared for sleep in the dwelling she still maintained separately from Nahkohe's until their union was formalized, she found herself unexpectedly visited by doubts. Sitting by her small fire, she traced patterns in the dirt floor, Apache symbols mingling with letters from the alphabet her father had taught her. Her life had changed so completely in the span of 8 months, from unwanted wife to respected member of an Apache band, from captive to free woman, making a choice that would have been unimaginable in her former world. Part of her wondered if she was truly ready for this final step, this irrevocable binding of her fate to people who had once been considered enemies by everyone she knew. A soft sound at her dwelling's entrance interrupted her thoughts. Kiona stood there, a small bundle in her arms. "For the ceremony," the Apache woman said, stepping inside and unwrapping the package to reveal a delicate hair ornament fashioned from porcupine quills, beads, and hawk feathers. "It belonged to my grandmother. She too married a man from another band, against much opposition. Rides Like Wind accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity, recognizing the significant gesture from a woman who had lost so much to conflict between their peoples. "Were they happy?" she asked. "Your grandmother and her husband from another band?" Kiona's eyes crinkled with a rare smile. "They fought like thunder and lightning," she said, "but they stood together against all challenges, until death separated in them after 50 summers. As Kiona departed, Rides Like Wind held the hair ornament in her palm, feeling its weight, not just of materials, but of history, of connections that transcended the artificial boundaries humans created between themselves. Her doubts didn't vanish, but they settled into proper perspective. Change always brought uncertainty. The question was not whether the path ahead would be smooth, it wouldn't be, but whether it was the path her heart recognized as true. The broken arrow lay in the dust, its shaft splintered, its meaning clear. Peace interrupted, harmony shattered. Nahkohe stared at it for one heartbeat before shouting the alarm that sent the camp into organized chaos. They came in the false dawn, when night still clung to the canyon walls, but the eastern sky had begun to lighten. The raiders, ghost dogs, band, unmistakable in their mixed garb of Apache, settler, and Mexican elements, had somehow discovered the narrow entrance to their sanctuary. The warning from the sentries came barely in time. Families scrambled for shelter in the higher caves, warriors grabbed weapons, and those caught in between, the elderly, the young, the injured, were hustled toward the emergency escape route they had prepared along the canyon's western wall. Rides Like Wind had been awake already, making final adjustments to her wedding garment in the pre-dawn quiet. At the first alarm, she abandoned the unfinished dress, grabbing her knife and the old cavalry pistol she had maintained since her days with her father. As she emerged from her dwelling, she saw Nahkohe organizing the defense, his face set in, the hard lines of a chief at war. "How many?" she called to him as she ran to join the fighters. 20, maybe more," he replied grimly. They found the hidden path. The implications were serious, their carefully chosen sanctuary compromised on the very eve of their celebration. But there was no time to dwell on this. The first attackers were already breaching the narrow entrance, their whoops and cries, designed to strike terror. What followed was a blur of violence and desperate courage. The band's warriors, though outnumbered, had the advantage of familiar ground and defensive positions. Women who had never fought before took up bows and knives to protect their children. Even the oldest members of the band contributed, raining stones down from higher positions onto the invaders below. Rides Like Wind found herself fighting alongside Kiona, the two women defending the path to the caves where the children had been hidden. 3 raiders charged them, clearly expecting easy prey. The first fell to Kiona's precisely aimed arrow. The second reeled back with Rides Like Wind's knife buried in his shoulder. The third, seeing his companions falter, retreated to seek easier targets. "Like thunder and lightning," Rides Like Wind said to Kiona, remembering the woman's words about her grandparents. Kiona's fierce smile was answer enough as they repositioned to meet the next threat. Across the camp, Nahkohe and Tarak fought back to back, their lifelong friendship evident in the seamless coordination of their movements. When one attacked, the other defended. When one faltered, the other stepped forward. They had thinned the raiders' numbers significantly when a new figure appeared at the canyon entrance, taller than the others, with a wolf pelt draped over his shoulders and a cavalry saber in his hand. Ghost Dog had arrived to lead his band. Personally, the raider chief surveyed the battle with cold calculation, then barked orders that immediately changed the attackers' strategy. Instead of pressing forward, they began to fall back, forming a defensive line while several broke off to secure the canyon entrance. "They're cutting off our escape," Tarak realized aloud. Nahkohe nodded grimly. "And waiting for something." That something became apparent moments later when a group of raiders appeared on the rim of the canyon above, having scaled the supposedly unclimbable western wall. From that vantage point, they could rain arrows down on the defenders below with relative impunity. "The caves," Nahkohe said urgently. "We must get everyone to the caves." As the band began a fighting retreat toward the eastern wall, where the larger caves offered shelter, Ghost Dog's strategy revealed itself further. Rather than pursuing directly, the raiders began to selectively target individuals, primarily the younger women and children who had not yet reached safety. It was not random violence. It was calculated abduction. Rides Like Wind realized this, as she saw a raider seize Little Bird, throwing the struggling child over his shoulder as he retreated toward the canyon entrance. Without hesitation, she abandoned her position and gave chase, her pistol raised but unable to fire for fear of hitting the child. The raider, seeing her pursuit, ducked behind a boulder. When she rounded it, he was waiting. The blow caught her across the temple, sending her sprawling into darkness. When consciousness returned, she was being dragged roughly toward a horse. Through blurred vision, she saw the canyon in chaos, smoke rising from burning dwellings, scattered fighting as the band's warriors tried desperately to protect their people. The beautiful wedding blanket lay trampled in the dust, its intricate design stained with blood. "This one too," a harsh voice said above her. "Ghost Dog will want the white woman especially." As rough hands bound her wrists, she caught a glimpse of Nahkohe across the battlefield. He had seen her capture and was fighting frantically to reach her. But the press of raiders between them was too great. Their eyes met across the distance, a moment of connection amid the chaos. She saw in his face a promise that needed no words. He would come for her, no matter what stood in his way. Then she was thrown across a horse, and the canyon that had almost become her home receded behind her as the raiders made their escape. With their captives, the raider's mask felt strange against Nahkohe's face as he moved silently through the enemy camp. Made from cured leather and adorned with raven feathers, it proclaimed its wearer as one of Ghost Dog's chosen scouts, a disguise that might grant him precious minutes of anonymity in the raider's mountain stronghold. He had taken it from a sentry, an hour earlier, leaving the man bound and gagged in a narrow crevice, where he would not be found until long after Nahkohe's mission was complete. Now, with night fully descended, he navigated the warren of tents and crude shelters that housed the mixed band of outcasts. 3 days had passed since the attack on their canyon. 3 days of desperate tracking across harsh terrain. Following, the raiders trailed to this remote mountain camp nestled in a defensive position between towering mesas. 3 days of planning how he would retrieve what had been taken. Not just Rides Like Wind, but 5 children and 2 other women from the band. The raiders' stronghold was larger than he had anticipated, at least 40 fighters, plus their captives. Too many for a frontal assault, even if Tarek and the small rescue party waiting in the foothills joined him. This would require stealth, timing, and the element of surprise. Moving like a shadow between firelit spaces, Nahkohe searched for signs of the captives. He found them in a guarded pen on the camp's eastern edge, the children huddled together for warmth, the women sitting protectively around them. All except Rides Like Wind. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Had she been separated from the others? Claimed by Ghost Dog himself? The raider chief's reputation for cruelty toward captives was well known among the Apache bands. Changing direction, Nahkohe moved toward the center of the camp, where a larger shelter stood apart from the others. As he approached, he heard raised voices from within, one unmistakably female, speaking in a mixture of Apache and English with a familiar defiant tone. "I told you already," Rides Like Wind was saying. "Nahkohe's band has nothing you want, no wealth, no special weapons." "Yet they found the hidden canyon," replied a deeper voice, Ghost Dog, presumably. "A place of legend among the elders, a place said to hold ancient power. It's just a sheltered valley with good water," she countered. "Nothing magical about it." "The cave paintings tell another story," Ghost Dog said. as does your presence among them, white woman, a chief's woman who walks between worlds." His voice dropped too low for Nahkohe to hear the rest, but the implication was clear. Ghost Dog knew of the prophecy, the one about the eagle and the wolf hunting together, about the one who rides as equal, bringing harmony to broken circles. Somehow, he had connected rides like wind to these ancient words. Circling the shelter, Nahkohe found a tear in the hide, covering at the rear, small but large enough to see through. Inside, rides like wind stood defiantly before Ghost Dog, her hands bound but her posture unbowed. Despite bruises on her face and arms, she showed no sign of broken spirit. The raider chief paced before her, a peculiar intensity in his movements. Unlike his followers, who wore a hodgepodge of stolen garments, Ghost Dog was dressed in the traditional manner of an Apache war chief, but with disturbing additions. Human finger bones dangled from his belt. A necklace of teeth, not all animal, circled his neck. The old one spoke of power in the blending of bloodlines, Ghost Dog was saying. In the joining of enemies. Your chief understood this. Now I understand it too. Nahkohe felt a surge of rage as the raider's intent became clear. Ghost Dog sought to claim rides like wind for himself, not just as a captive, but as the key to some twisted interpretation of the prophecy. Before he could formulate a new plan, movement to his right made him freeze. A child, little bird, had somehow escaped the pen and was creeping toward the same shelter, a small knife clutched in her hand. The loyalty was touching but suicidally dangerous. In the split second he had to decide, Nahkohe chose the only path that might save them both. He stepped deliberately on a dry branch, the crack drawing the attention of a nearby guard, away from Little Bird's approach. "You there," the guard called in Apache. "What business by the chief's tent?" Nahkohe straightened, turning toward the guard with deliberate slowness. "Message from the sentries," he replied, disguising his voice and hoping the mask would conceal his identity long enough. The guard frowned, stepping closer. "I know all the scouts. Remove your mask." Instead, Nahkohe drove his knife upward, catching the man beneath the ribs in a silent, lethal strike. As the guard collapsed, Nahkohe pulled Little Bird into the shadows, clamping a hand over her mouth to stifle her surprised cry. "Brave one," he whispered, "but foolish. Stay hidden now." Eyes wide with recognition, the child nodded. Nahkohe positioned her in a sheltered crevice between rocks, then turned his attention back to the immediate problem, how to extract rides like wind from a shelter in the center of camp, surrounded by enemies, without raising an alarm that would doom them all. The decision was made for him when Ghost Dog emerged suddenly from the tent, dragging rides like wind with him. The raider chief's face was contorted with rage, a fresh scratch bleeding on his cheek. Clearly, whatever he had attempted inside the shelter had not gone as planned. "Bind her to the center post," Ghost Dog ordered the nearest guards. "Tomorrow at dawn, she will watch as I kill her Apache friends one by one. Perhaps then she will be more cooperative." As they led her away, rides like wind's gaze swept the darkness where Nahkohe hid. For an instant, he thought she had seen him, but her expression revealed nothing as she was taken to a post in the central clearing and secured there with multiple bindings. Ghost Dog stalked off toward another shelter, leaving 2 guards to watch the prisoner. The camp gradually quieted as most raiders sought sleep, save for the sentries at the perimeter and the captives' guards. Nahkohe retreated to where Little Bird waited. "I must free the others first," he whispered. "Then rides like wind. You will help by creating a distraction when I give the signal." The child nodded solemnly, her young face set with determination beyond her years. What followed was a masterpiece of stealth and timing. Using the stolen mask and the darkness, Nahkohe systematically eliminated the guards at the captive's pen. As he cut their bonds, he whispered instructions for their escape route to the waiting rescue party in the foothills. Then, with the captives poised to flee at his signal, he turned his attention to the center of camp. and to the woman who had transformed from prisoner to partner, from outsider to the very heart of his band's future. The dual-feathered headdress caught the light of the setting sun, eagle feathers intertwined with hawk feathers in a symbol of paths joined that could never be separated. Nahkohe adjusted it carefully on his head, the weight familiar yet different. With the addition of the hawk feathers, Rides Like Wind had contributed, feathers that had once belonged to her father. 5 days had passed since their escape from Ghost Dog's mountain stronghold. 5 days of healing, rebuilding, and preparation for the ceremony that had been interrupted by violence. The band had returned to their hidden canyon to find much of their settlement damaged but repairable. With characteristic resilience, they had set to work, restoring what had been broken, creating something stronger from the ruins. Not all wounds healed so easily. Little Hawk had died defending the children during the raid. 2 elders had succumbed to injuries sustained in the fighting, and Ghost Dog remained at large, wounded in the chaotic battle that had erupted during their escape, but alive and undoubtedly nursing both his injuries and his rage. Yet life continued, the wedding blanket salvaged from the dust and lovingly repaired by the women of the band, now hung at the entrance to the ceremonial circle. Inside, representatives from 2 worlds gathered in an unprecedented assembly. Stone Bear and 3 other elders from the main tribe sat in positions of honor, their presence a formal acknowledgement of Nahkohe's leadership and his right to choose his own path. They had arrived the previous day, guided by Tarek through the secret approach to the canyon. Their decision to attend, despite reservations about the unusual union, spoke volumes about the shifting attitudes among the Apache towards survival in changing times. Equally significant were the settlers who had accepted Nahkohe's invitation. McCready the trader, Dr. Morgan and his wife, and Jensen from the Northern Crossing. They sat somewhat awkwardly on the opposite side of the circle, the first white people ever to witness an Apache ceremony as honored guests rather than captives or conquerors. Between these 2 groups, the band itself formed the bulk of the gathering, families sitting together, children barely containing their excitement at the rare celebration, warriors standing at the perimeter with ceremonial rather than practical weapons. Outside the circle, in keeping with tradition, Rides Like Wind waited with Enola and Kiona, who had helped her prepare for this moment. The old medicine woman had painted sacred symbols on her hands and face, traditional Apache designs of protection and fertility. Kiona had arranged her hair in the style of an Apache bride, incorporating the treasured hair ornament that had once belonged to her grandmother. But Rides Like Wind's dress was uniquely her own creation. Neither fully Apache nor frontier, but a harmonious blending of both. The soft deerskin had been cut and sewn in the practical Apache style, allowing freedom of movement, but she had incorporated elements of frontier embroidery and beadwork that told her own story in patterns meaningful to her. "It is time," Enola said softly, her ancient eyes bright with rare emotion. Taking a deep breath, Rides Like Wind stepped forward, Kiona and Enola at her sides as tradition dictated. Together, they walked toward the ceremonial circle where Nahkohe waited with Stone Bear, who would conduct the joining ritual. The assembled guests grew silent as she entered, all eyes turning to take in this unprecedented bride. She kept her gaze forward, focused on Nahkohe, drawing strength from the quiet pride in his eyes as she approached. Stone Bear began the ceremony in Apache, his deep voice carrying the ancient words across the canyon. Then, in a significant departure from tradition, he repeated key phrases in carefully practiced English, a gesture of inclusion for the settler guests that clearly cost the proud elder some effort. "2 rivers join to make one stronger path to the sea," he intoned in both languages. "2 stars shine together to make one brighter light in the darkness." The ritual itself was brief but meaningful, an exchange of personal items symbolizing the joining of lives. Nahkohe presented Rides Like Wind with his grandfather's bow, Symbolically placing the protection of his lineage in her hands, she gave him her father's compass, entrusting him with her heritage and direction. Then came the moment that had been most discussed among the elders, the exchange of vows. Traditionally, Apache joining ceremonies involved no spoken promises, the actions themselves being considered sufficient commitment. But Rides Like Wind had requested this element from her own culture, and after much deliberation, Stone Bear had allowed it. "I, Nahkohe, walker of the desert path, take you as my only wife," he said in clear, careful English. Then, switching to Apache, "My protection is your shelter. My strength is your defense. My spirit is joined with yours until we walk the star road together." Rides Like Wind responded in kind, first in Apache, which she now spoke fluently, then in English. "My heart rides beside yours, neither leading nor following, but keeping the same pace across whatever terrain we must cross." As Stone Bear wrapped the wedding blanket around both their shoulders, binding them together in its embrace, a murmur of approval rose from the gathered witnesses. Apache and settler alike, recognizing the simple power of the moment. "What different paths have joined," Stone Bear proclaimed. "Let no force separate." The celebration that followed broke yet another barrier as the two groups, former enemies, now cautious witnesses to a shared future, found themselves sharing food, stories, and eventually, as the night deepened and inhibitions eased, even music and dance. Dr. Morgan's wife produced a small fiddle from her saddlebag, playing frontier tunes that had the settlers clapping along. Not to be outdone, the Apache drummers demonstrated their rhythms, complex patterns that told stories without words. By midnight, improbably, the sounds had begun to merge, fiddle and drum finding common ground in the universal language of celebration. Amid the festivities, Nahkohe and Rides Like Wind slipped away to the quiet edge of the canyon, under the same stars that had witnessed their first shared confidences. They stood in companionable silence, the wedding blanket still draped around their shoulders. "The prophecy," Rides Like Wind said finally. "Do you believe it was about us?" Nahkohe considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps we made it about us by the choices we have made." She smiled at this practical wisdom. "Either way, Ghost Dog believes it. He will come again. And we will be ready," Nahkohe replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "Not alone, but together, with allies from both worlds." Below them, the improbable gathering continued. Apache elders conversing with frontier settlers, children from both communities playing games together, warriors and homesteaders finding common ground in shared stories of survival in the harsh desert landscape. It was just one night in one hidden canyon among a small group of people. But as they watched, both knew they were witnessing something rare and precious, a glimpse of what might be possible beyond the boundaries of fear and history that had divided their peoples for generations. The cradleboard leaned against the dwelling center post, its carefully crafted frame adorned with symbols from two cultures, Apache protection signs intertwined with frontier wildflower motifs. Though not yet needed, its presence spoke of hope and future in a place that had once known only survival and present concerns. 1 year had passed since Nahkohe and Rides Like Wind had exchanged vows beneath the canyon walls. 1 year of growth, challenge, and unexpected developments that had transformed both their small band and the larger world around them. The hidden canyon had flourished under their joint leadership. What had begun as a temporary refuge had evolved into a permanent settlement, with sturdy dwellings built into the protective embrace of the canyon walls, fields cultivated near the spring, and horses corralled in natural enclosures formed by the landscape. More surprising had been the gradual, cautious relationships established with the outside world. The wedding ceremony had opened doors, previously thought permanently closed. Dr. Morgan now made quarterly visits, bringing medicines, And news from the settlements. Macready had established a regular trading arrangement, bringing goods directly to a meeting point near the canyon, rather than requiring the band to risk trips to distant outposts. Even Stone Bear and the tribal elders had softened their stance, recognizing that Nahkohe's band had found a middle path that preserved essential traditions while adapting to the realities of a changing frontier. Young warriors from the main tribe occasionally came to learn their unique methods of horse training, returning with skills valuable for the tribe's survival. Ghost Dog remained a shadow on their horizon. Though he had never again attacked directly, reports of his band's activities reached them periodically. The raiders had moved north, targeting isolated settlements and smaller Apache groups who lacked the defensive advantages or alliances that Nahkohe's band had established. Rides like wind stood at the canyon's edge, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of amber and gold. Her hand rested lightly on her swelling belly, feeling the movements of the child that would be born when the winter gave way to spring. The first child of a new generation, neither fully Apache nor white, but something unique and unprecedented. She heard Nahkohe's approach before she saw him, his deliberate footsteps announcing his presence out of courtesy rather than necessity. After a year together, they had developed the comfortable rhythms of long partnership, anticipating each other's needs and respecting each other's habits. "The army patrol passed to the east," he said, joining her at the overlook. "Lieutenant, Caldwell kept his word. They maintained distance from our boundary markers." She nodded, unsurprised. "Thomas Caldwell is a man of honor, unlike some who wear the blue coat." Their arrangement with the young lieutenant had evolved into an unexpected asset. In exchange for information about raider movements and assistance tracking hostile bands, Caldwell provided unofficial protection, steering army patrols away from their territory and occasionally warning them of policy changes that might affect their precarious independence. "The Mustang training goes well," Nahkohe continued, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "The new methods you taught Little Hawk's brother have produced horses even the army is willing to pay premium prices for." Their successful horse trading operation had become the band's primary source of external goods, a peaceful commerce that benefited both the Apache and the settlers who purchased their exceptionally well-trained mounts. "And the children's lessons?" she asked, thinking of the small school they had established, where the band's children learned both Apache traditions and the reading and writing skills that would help them navigate the changing world. "Kiona has a gift for teaching," Nahkohe acknowledged with a small smile. "Though she complains they ask too many questions." "Questions are how they will survive," Rides Like Wind replied, neither rejecting the new world nor surrendering to it, but questioning it, shaping their own path. As darkness settled over the canyon, fires were lit below, not just for cooking and warmth, but for the evening gathering where stories were shared, skills taught, and the day's events discussed. It had become the heart of their community, this time when all members, regardless of age or origin, came together to strengthen the bonds between them. "Do you ever regret it?" Nahkohe asked suddenly, his voice low. "Choosing this life instead of returning to your people when you could have?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "My people are here," she said simply. "I was never truly one of them there. Always too wild, too different. Here that wildness is not something to be broken, but valued." He nodded, understanding, his hand gentle on her rounded belly. "And our child, between two worlds." "Not between," she corrected. "Beyond, the first of something new." They descended to join the gathering, moving easily among the community that had become family. Enola beckoned them to sit near her, the old woman's face creased with a smile as she made room on her blanket. Though her body had grown frailer with passing seasons, her mind remained sharp, her memory the band's living connection to ancient ways. "I dreamed of your child last night," she told them without preamble. a strong spirit with feet in many worlds and eyes that see far. From across the fire, Tarak, now formerly Nahkohe's second-in-command, raised his cup in salute. To feet, in many worlds, he called, his once skeptical voice now warm with acceptance, and eyes that see beyond boundaries. Others joined the toast, the simple phrase spreading around the circle until all had spoken it. A blessing for the unborn child, but also an acknowledgement of the path they had all chosen together. As the desert night deepened around them, Nahkohe and rides like wind sat shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by the community they had helped forge from disparate pieces. Above them, the stars traced ancient patterns across the sky, the same stars that had guided their ancestors, that would guide their children, that would remain constant even as the world below continued its inevitable transformation. The story of the Apache, who bought a girl too wild for any man, had become something else entirely. A tale of two spirits who had recognized in each other not property to be owned, but partners in creating a future neither could have imagined alone.